At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's GeneralG. Let's begin.
It was the space pirates. They came to our world and we had to flee just to survive.
The small Sativ ambassador Abi sobbed as he spoke, tears streaming through his bright orange fur.
We failed as warriors. We couldn't protect our home.
He stood atop the massive Galactic Council table once again, gripping the edges of the microphone stand that had been adjusted down to his diminutive height. Even with the amplification, even standing on the table itself where everyone could see him, Abi felt impossibly small. The curved amphitheater stretched around him, tier upon tier of seats occupied by representatives from dozens of species, all staring down at him. His small paws trembled against the metal stand. Abi cut a pitiful figure. He was, like all Sativ, roughly the size of an Earth housecat, a compact round body covered entirely in that bright orange fur that now looked matted and unkempt from stress. His eyes, disproportionately large for his face, were red-rimmed and glistening with fresh tears. His wide mouth trembled, revealing the tiny pointed teeth within as he struggled to continue speaking. But most telling were his antennae, those distinctive stalks sprouting from his head, each topped with a fluffy pom-pom. They drooped low, nearly touching his shoulders, quivering with grief and shame. To his right, seated in the human delegation's chair, Ambassador George Hampton watched in silence. The tall man's face was grave, his jaw set, his dark eyes fixed not on Abi, but on the other representatives scattered throughout the chamber.
We had no choice,
Abi continued, his voice breaking.
The Kraith pirates came with warships, dozens of them. They had weapons we'd never seen, shields that absorbed our fire. We tried to fight. We tried to defend our cities, but...
His voice cracked completely, and he had to pause, wiping at his large eyes with one small paw.
We evacuated everyone we could. 3,000 ships, filled with civilians, families, children. We abandoned our homeworld because we couldn't protect it.
A sound rippled through the chamber. Not sympathy, laughter. It started as snickers from the upper tiers, then grew. The insectoid representative of the Great Collective, a towering being with multiple limbs and compound eyes, leaned forward in his seat.
The mighty Sativ warriors,
the insectoid's translator rendered his clicking speech into standard.
So fierce, so proud, conquered by common pirates.
More clicking that sounded distinctly like laughter.
Perhaps you should have spent less time declaring war on species you couldn't defeat, and more time defending your own territory. This is what happens to those who bark louder than they bite.
More laughter erupted, this time from multiple sections of the chamber. Abi's antennae drooped even lower, his pom-poms dragging against the table surface.
I agree completely,
came another voice, this one from Hizip, the representative of the Furred faction, a coalition of mammalian species who had always resented the Sativ's inclusion in their category. Hizip was covered in sleek silver fur, easily 3 times Abi's size, with a long snout and intelligent eyes that now glittered with contempt.
We of the Furred Collective do not claim the Sativ as one of our own. Losing one's homeworld to pirates? Pathetic. And for a species that love to brag about their warrior nature, this is beyond embarrassing. You've disgraced all mammalian species with your weakness.
Maybe,
the avian leader began from across the chamber, his crest feathers fluttering.
They should have tried declaring war on the pirates, like that time they've tried. Bang!
The sound of a fist striking the council table reverberated through the chamber like a thunderclap. The entire structure shook, and Abi's knees buckled, nearly sending him tumbling. He grabbed the microphone stand desperately, his heart hammering as he looked to his right. Ambassador George Hampton had risen from his seat. His fist was still pressed against the table, and his face was terrible to behold. Not angry in the explosive way some species showed rage, but cold, controlled, dangerous. His eyes swept across the chamber, meeting the gaze of each representative who had laughed, and one by one they fell silent. "Are you finished?" George's voice was quiet but clear. "Are you quite finished mocking a species that just lost everything? Making jokes while refugees flee their burning homeworld?" The silence deepened. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. "You should be ashamed of yourselves," George continued, his words precise and cutting. "Every single one of you. A civilization is in crisis. Families are homeless. An entire culture has been displaced by violence. And your response is to laugh? To mock them for not being warriors enough?" He paused, letting that sink in. "The Sativ came here for help. They came to this council, the institution that claims to uphold peace and cooperation among species, and you respond with cruelty." Several representatives had the decency to look down at their consoles. Others found sudden interest in the walls. Whether it was shame finally taking root, or simply fear of the human Death Worlder's displeasure, Abi couldn't tell. Humans were rumored to be the fiercest species in the council, survivors of a brutal death world, capable of violence that made other species uncomfortable just to contemplate. Right now, seeing George's cold fury, Abi believed every rumor. The silence stretched for another long moment. Then George's expression softened, and he turned to Abi. The transformation was remarkable. The cold anger melted away, replaced by genuine warmth. "Abi?" George said gently, kneeling down so he was closer to eye level with the small figure on the table. "While the council sorts out long-term arrangements for your people, and they will sort them out, I'll make certain of that, I'd like to extend an invitation on behalf of Earth. Would you and your people like to spend a week with us? Not as refugees, but as our honored guests. Just for a few days while we figure out the next steps." Abi's antennae moved uncertainly. He wiped at his eyes again, trying to compose himself. We don't want to be a burden. We've already been humiliated enough today." "You wouldn't be a burden," George assured him, "and I can promise you something." He leaned in, his voice taking on a conspiratorial tone that somehow made Abi feel like they were the only two beings in the chamber. "Every single member of your species will get cotton candy and ice cream, plus all kinds of candy you've never tried yet. Chocolate bars, gummy bears, lollipops, rock candy, taffy. Earth has more types of candy than you can imagine." Abi felt his traitorous antennae perk up at the mention of sweets. His mouth watered at the memory of that chocolate ice cream from their first visit to Earth. Cotton candy? He'd read about it in the databases. Spun sugar in colorful clouds. And there were more types of candy, more frozen treats? He tried desperately to keep his expression neutral, knowing that if he showed too much enthusiasm, the other representatives would mock him even more. Weak species conquered by sugar, they'd say. The warrior race defeated by desserts. His antennae wanted to spring fully upright with excitement, but he forced them to remain at a dignified half-mast. "That is acceptable," Abi managed, trying to sound formal and composed rather than eager. "We accept your generous offer, Ambassador Hampton. The Sativ people would be honored to accept Earth's hospitality while the Council addresses our situation." George smiled and extended his hand. That human gesture of goodwill, a handshake. Abi was profoundly grateful for the formality of it. They were in public, surrounded by representatives who had just spent the last 10 minutes mocking his people. A handshake was dignified, professional, appropriate for ambassadors. If they had been alone, Abi knew George would have just patted his head. And the worst part was that Abi would have let him, because it was actually quite comforting. But here in front of everyone, a handshake allowed him to maintain at least a shred of dignity. Abi placed his tiny paw in George's massive hand, and they shook, once, twice, 3 times. Professional, diplomatic. No one could mock him for this. Even if, deep inside, past all the grief and shame and exhaustion, a small part of Abi was already wondering what cotton candy tasted like, and whether Earth had any chocolate ice cream left. One day later, the Sativ fleet approached Earth for refuge, hope, and worry equally present across the fleet. Commander Abi pressed his small paws against the viewport, watching the planet swell from a distant marble into a vast sphere of blues and greens. Behind him, General Lax paced. The purple-furred veteran had worn a path in the deck plating over the past hour, his antennae moving up and down in an erratic rhythm that betrayed his inner turmoil. General Izzy, Pip, and the others watched from their stations, the nervous energy on the bridge thick enough to taste. "Commander," General Lax's voice cut through Abi's thoughts. "What if they change their minds? What if they remember we declared war on them?"
"The humans accepted us," Abi said. "Ambassador Hampton personally invited us."
"Yes, but that was before," General Izzy interjected, her bright pink fur somehow looking less vibrant than usual. "That was at the council, with everyone watching. Now that we're actually coming here, with millions of us requiring food and space, what if they've reconsidered?" From the navigation station, young Pip's voice wavered slightly.
"We're approaching Earth's outer atmosphere. Still receiving clearance signals, Commander. They're guiding us to landing coordinates."
"See?" Abi gestured at the console. "They're still welcoming us."
Pip's antennae tilted in confusion.
"There's something unusual with our landing coordinates, sir."
Abi moved to the navigation station, his small legs carrying him across the bridge.
"Show me."
The display shifted, and text appeared. Sports Stadium, Civilian Recreation Facility, capacity 80,000 humans. General Lax stopped pacing, stopping beside Abi. "That's not a spaceport. It's a trap," General Izzy added, moving closer. Her voice was flat, certain. "They're herding us into an enclosed space." Abi studied the image. The stadium's field showed rows of colorful dots, tents, the database labeled them. Medical stations, distribution centers. The humans had transformed their recreational facility into a complete refugee reception area.
"No,"
Abi's voice cut through the bridge's tension. He pointed at the viewport, where Earth dominated their view.
"The humans could destroy us with a single warship. They don't need tricks. If they wanted us gone, we'd already be scattered atoms."
Silence answered him. Even Lax's pacing stopped.
"Pip,"
Abi returned to his command chair.
"confirm landing clearance and begin descent protocols."
"Yes, Commander."
The ship shuddered as they entered Earth's atmosphere. Clouds parted around them like curtains, revealing the surface in increasing detail. Cities sprawled like circuits across the continents. Pip guided them down with the skill of someone determined to prove himself. The 300 ships of the Sativ fleet descended in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming in Earth's sun. The stadium's details resolved as they dropped lower. Abi could see the individual tents now, hundreds of them arranged in neat rows across the field. Between them, larger structures rose. Medical tents with Red Cross symbols. Distribution centers with supplies stacked high. Information booths staffed by waiting humans. General Lax pressed against the viewport beside Abi, his breath fogging the glass.
"They did all this for us."
His voice hardly reached a whisper.
"They actually prepared."
Abi felt his throat tighten. He'd hoped for help, but seeing it, the scale, the care, the obvious effort, overwhelmed him. The ships settled onto the field one by one, landing gears extending in an orderly formation. Abi's vessel touched down first, positioned at the formation's head. Through the viewport, he could see human figures standing at the field's edge where grass met pavement. One figure stood taller than the rest, distinctive even at this distance. George had come to meet them personally. "All ships, this is Commander Abi." His voice traveled through the fleet-wide channel. "We are down. Begin civilian evacuation. Families with young first, then elderly, then general population. Orderly and calm. The humans have prepared extensively for our arrival. We will not disappoint them with chaos." He turned to his original team, the 50 warriors who'd already visited Earth once, who'd survived the grass and the bees and the cat. They clustered near the bridge entrance, watching him with expectant eyes. "We go first," Abi said. "Assess the situation, confirm safety, then help coordinate the civilian evacuation. Millions are depending on us to do this right." Captain Mira stepped forward, her brown fur sleek and her antennae rigid with determination. Behind her, the others followed with similar expressions. They were nervous. They were trying to hide it, just like true warriors should. "Remember," he told them as they walked to the hatch, "we are friends with humanity. We are not trying to conquer Earth. There's nothing to fear." The hatch cycled open. Sunlight flooded in as the ramp extended downward. Abi walked to the ramp's edge and stopped. The stadium field stretched before him, vast and green. The grass here looked different from the park he had once visited, shorter, more uniform, clearly maintained, but still grass, still potentially dangerous to their paws. "Careful with every step," Avi commanded. "Test your footing. Watch for insects. Follow my lead." He started down the ramp, his small legs taking it slow. Behind him, 50 pairs of paws moved in synchronized caution, taking them across the vast field. George Hampton approached them from the entrance, and Abi was struck again by the sheer scale of humans. The ambassador stood nearly 2 meters tall, his shadow stretching across multiple sativ as he drew near. He knelt down, folding those long legs, bringing himself to a height that was merely towering rather than overwhelming. His smile reached his eyes. No mockery lived there, no condescension, just genuine warmth. "Welcome back to Earth, Commander Abi." George's voice was gentle. "Welcome, all of you." Abi felt his antennae rise in optimism. Around him, his warriors clustered closer, forming a small furball huddle of curiosity and nervousness. George's gaze swept across the group, and his smile widened. "I remember you, the brave ones who tried ice cream first." He gestured toward the stadium tunnel. "This time, we're doing this properly. You're staying for at least a week. So, let me show you around. I want you to feel at home here." He stood and started walking, then immediately slowed his pace, adjusting his stride to accommodate their shorter legs. The gesture was subtle, unconscious, the mark of someone who thought about others' needs without making a show of it. They followed him through the tunnel, their paws pattering against concrete. The tunnel's cool shadows gave way to bright sunlight as they emerged on the other side. Every sativ stopped walking. Several warriors' mouths fell open. Antennae shot up so fast that pom-poms bounced. Someone made a sound like a squeaky toy being compressed. The street outside the stadium had transformed into something from a dream. Food trucks lined both sides of the road in colorful rows that stretched to the horizon. Each truck was a work of art, painted in brilliant hues, decorated with images of food, adorned with flags and lights and signs in dozens of human languages. The air itself seemed alive with smells, sweet and savory, spicy and mild, familiar and utterly alien. Abi's nostrils opened and closed, his mouth watered. George stood beside them, watching their reactions with obvious delight. "This is Earth's welcome to the Sativ people." He swept his arm across the scene like a showman revealing his masterpiece. "Each truck represents different food from different human cultures. Over the next week, you'll try everything. But let me give you the tour first." He started walking down the street. The Sativ group followed like ducklings, trailing their mother, a small, fluffy parade of curious warriors. George stopped at the first truck. Abi recognized it instantly. The ice cream truck, with its white exterior and cheerful painted treats. "Who wants ice cream?" the woman inside asked. "Later, I promise. There will be plenty of ice cream. But let me show them everything first," said George. The next truck was bright red and white, decorated with images of circular foods covered in colorful toppings. George gestured to a human customer receiving a large flat circle of bread covered in red sauce and melted yellow cheese. "Pizza," George explained. "Bread with tomato sauce, cheese, and various toppings. We eat it with our hands." Captain Mira's antennae tilted in confusion and mild horror. "With your hands? Is that hygienic?" "It's traditional and delicious." They continued down the row. George showed them the hot dog stand with its cylindrical meat nestled in soft bread. Kira's eyes lit up at the concept. "Meat in bread? That's brilliant." Then came the cotton candy cart, and Abby's careful composure shattered. The vendor was spinning sugar into enormous pink and blue clouds that looked like captured pieces of sky. They were impossibly fluffy, impossibly colorful, impossibly wonderful. Abby's antennae shot straight up before he could stop them. His eyes widened to their maximum size. His small mouth opened in a perfect O of wonder. George noticed. Of course he noticed. The human ambassador smiled with gentle amusement. "Someone remembers I promised cotton candy." Every warrior was staring now with the identical expressions of longing. The cotton candy looked like magic made edible, like dreams spun from sugar. "We will definitely be trying that," Abby managed, trying to sound dignified while his antennae betrayed his excitement. More trucks followed. Burgers that smelled rich and complex, crepes and waffles that looked delicate and golden, an Asian food truck where a chef was folding dumplings. Abby should have been building excitement with each new sight and smell. Instead, a different weight was growing in his chest. The numbers kept adding up in his mind. Dozens of food trucks, a converted stadium, supplies for millions, medical facilities, staff, resources. His antennae began to droop. How much was this costing humanity? The Sadiv had nothing to offer in return. No trade goods, no resources, no technology Earth didn't already possess. They were refugees with empty paws and desperate hope. He fell back from the group, his small legs slowing. The other warriors surged ahead, debating which foods to try first, comparing favorites, their voices high and happy. George was explaining something about burger toppings to General Izzy. No one noticed Abby hanging back, except George. The human ambassador turned, his eyes finding Abby with that uncanny awareness he possessed. He paused, said something to the group that Abby couldn't hear, then walked back. Abby took a deep breath and tugged on George's pant leg. George knelt immediately, his expression shifting to concern. "Everything okay?" The words tumbled out before Abby could stop them. "How much is this costing humanity? All these trucks, the stadium, accommodations for millions?" His antennae drooped until the pom-poms nearly touched the ground. "We're grateful, truly, but we don't want to bankrupt your species helping ours. We have nothing to give you in return. No resources, no trade goods. We're just refugees with nothing." George looked at him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was a warm sound, genuine and relieved, but Abby's fur still bristled with confusion. Why was the human laughing at him? George's laughter faded into a soft smile. "I'm sorry. I'm not laughing at you, Abby. Saving your species is costing humanity virtually nothing." Abby blinked. His antennae tilted sideways in bewilderment. "What?" "Well, virtually nothing. In terms of resources, accommodating the Sadiv is one of the easiest things we've ever done." "That can't be right." Abby shook his head, pom-poms bouncing. "There are millions of us." George held up a hand. "Let me explain the economics, okay? Your homeworld had similar gravity to Earth, right? Abby nodded. That means no expensive gravity adjustments, no environmental systems for that. You just exist here comfortably. George ticked off a finger. Your small size means housing is incredibly cheap. We can fit dozens of you in spaces that would house one larger species. That stadium? It could house maybe a few thousand humans. We're fitting 500,000 of you in there. Abby's eyes widened as the mathematics clicked into place. George continued, ticking off more fingers. Your size also means you eat much less. A single human meal could feed 10 or more Sodif. The food trucks out here are serving thousands of you for the cost of serving hundreds of humans. Another finger. And your immune systems, robust enough that you can breathe our air without expensive filtration. You won't catch our diseases, we won't catch yours. He leaned closer, his voice taking on an educational tone. Do you know how much it costs to host one Morphid? They need specially controlled environments, specific atmospheric compositions, temperature regulation, humidity control, all monitored constantly. One Morphid costs more to accommodate for a day than 1,000 Sativ cost for a week. 1,000? Abby's voice barely reached a whisper. He sat down on the pavement. His legs couldn't hold him anymore. His antennae drooped forward, nearly touching the ground in front of him. I don't understand. How can we be so cheap to help? George's expression softened with genuine kindness. He sat down too, folding his long legs to bring himself closer to Abby's level. Because you're compatible with Earth. Your people adapted to a world similar to ours. You can survive here without special equipment, without expensive modifications. Compared to most species in the Galactic Council, hosting the Sativ is absurdly economical. But all this preparation. The stadium was empty anyway. We use it maybe a few dozen times a year. The rest of the time, it just sits there. And the food trucks? George gestured down the street. Some are here as charity, yes, but others see it as a business opportunity. Millions of new customers with unique tastes? They're thrilled. Abby looked up at George, his large eyes glistening. We're not a burden? You're not a burden. You're guests, friends, maybe even family, and easy to maintain at that. The weight in Abby's chest didn't disappear entirely, but it shifted, transformed into something lighter. He'd been carrying guilt for days, fear that his people were imposing an impossible strain. And now? I thought we were destroying your economy, Abby admitted quietly. George laughed again, that warm sound. Far from it. Some of our economists argued this is good for Earth. A cute picture with one of you will promote a small business better than any marketing agency. Abby felt his antennae slowly rising, and hope began to bloom in his chest. George stood, brushing off his pants. He raised his voice, addressing not just Abby, but the whole group of 50 warriors who had gathered nearby, listening with rapt attention. I want all of you to understand something important. His voice carried across the street, commanding attention without demanding it. I know you're feeling low. You lost your planet. The Council mocked you. I saw how they treated you. Several antennae drooped at the reminder. But I want you to remember something. George's voice grew stronger, fiercer. Most species in the Council are bigger than you, stronger than you in some ways. They love to brag about it. Warriors shifted uncomfortably, clearly remembering specific insults. But you know what? George's expression transformed into something fierce and proud. Most of them are too afraid to come anywhere near Earth without environmental suits. Abby saw several warriors' antennae perk up with sudden interest. Kira's mouth fell open slightly. General Lax stood straighter. But you? George gestured at all of them with both hands. You Sativ can walk on a death world and be just fine. You can breathe our air without filters. You walk in our gravity without assistance. You eat our food without getting sick. You touch our plants, encounter our wildlife, and survive. Only a true warrior species can have a good time here on Earth without special equipment. Captain Mira spoke slowly, as if the realization was just hitting her. We can survive Earth unprotected. The Hyssop couldn't do that, someone else added. The ones who laughed at us couldn't even land here safely, Kira said, her voice growing stronger with each word. Exactly, George nodded firmly. You're tough enough to handle a death world naturally. That's not weakness as far as I am concerned. The warriors were standing taller now. Their antennae rose like a forest of colorful stalks, pom-poms swaying with renewed confidence. Their small bodies seemed larger somehow, filled with pride instead of shame. So, don't let mean comments hurt your warrior spirit. George's voice softened. Don't let losing your planet define you. You're here. You're strong. You're survivors. You survived a pirate attack. You survived fleeing your homeworld. And you can survive a whole week on Earth. Remember that. Silence followed his words. Then General Lax raised one small paw in the air. We are survivors! We are warriors, General Izzy added, her pink fur bristling with renewed pride. The chorus grew, 50 voices shouting affirmations in high-pitched determination. The sound echoed off the food trucks, bounced between buildings, rose toward Earth's sky. George let them have their moment. Then, when the shouting faded to excited murmurs, he smiled. Now, how about that ice cream I promised? The response was immediate and chaotic. Warriors bounced with excitement, multiple voices calling out at once in a cacophony of enthusiasm as they rushed to the ice cream truck. From where he sat, Abi could see warriors comparing flavors, laughing, bouncing with sugar-induced joy. For the first time since fleeing their homeworld, his people looked genuinely happy. But one worry still gnawed at him. It sat in his chest like a cold stone, refusing to be warmed by ice cream promises or kind words. George, Abi's expression grew serious, his antennae lowered. I'm still worried about our homeworld. George looked down at him, waiting silently. Pirate King Grossar and his fleet, Abi's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They conquered our planet in hours. His small paws clenched into fists. What if they decide to come after us here? What if they track us to Earth and attack? George scratched his chin thoughtfully. Abi watched the gesture, noting the way the human's expression shifted. A slight smile crossed George's face. Not quite amused, but something close to it. Something knowing. Something that suggested he was holding information he found particularly interesting. About that, George said. At the same time, in a dark interrogation room on the other side of the galaxy, Pirate King Grossar found himself bound by energy cuffs. His forearms were locked behind his back, the restraints digging into his thick gray skin. Confusion crossed his mind like storm clouds gathering, dark, turbulent, and increasingly ominous. He couldn't understand any of this. The enforcers of the Galactic Council had descended on his fleet with a decisiveness that shocked him. No negotiations, no warnings, no demands for surrender. They'd simply appeared, overwhelmed his ships with superior firepower, and extracted him and his entire crew within hours. The Kraith pirates, feared across multiple star systems, had been taken down like amateur smugglers. For decades, Grossar had operated with impunity. The Council enforcers had always seen his enormous size, nearly 3 meters tall and twice as wide as most species, and his thick gray hide that could deflect standard weapon fire, and they backed off. When he held 4 energy pistols simultaneously, one in each of his 4 powerful arms, even the bravest officers found reasons to look the other way. Space piracy was, after all, a minor concern when weighed against the cost of confronting someone like him and his crew. The law had always preferred leaving him alone. It was easier, cheaper, safer. So what had changed? The door to the interrogation suddenly opened, flooding the dim space with harsh light from the corridor beyond. Grossar squinted against the brightness, his four eyes adjusting slowly. A figure entered, green scales, a reptilian officer whose species Grossar vaguely recognized as part of the Council's enforcement division. The officer moved with economical steps, carrying a datapad that glowed in the dimness. The reptilian simply placed the datapad on the metal table between them. The screen showed an image of a barren planet, all gray stone and harsh angles, with massive fortress-like structures visible from orbit. "You and your crew will serve your life sentences here," the officer said. "Detention World 7, maximum security. No parole, no appeals." Grossar stared at the image, then at the officer, then back at the image, his forearms strained against the cuffs. "Life sentence?" His voice rumbled like stones grinding together. "There hasn't been a trial. There hasn't been any legal process. You can't just—" "The sentence has been determined," the officer interrupted calmly. "Do you have any questions about the facility itself?" "Questions?" Grossar's voice rose to a roar. "Why wasn't there a trial? Why was the Council so decisive and violent? Why did the galactic military intervene in a matter of simple space piracy?" He leaned forward as much as his restraints allowed, his massive frame making the interrogation chair creak. "We took one backwater planet from a species nobody cares about. This level of response is madness." It was unusual. More than unusual, it was completely outside normal Council response. Space pirates operated in a gray area, precisely because the Council couldn't be bothered to police every system. As long as you avoided the major trade routes and important species, you could carve out territory with minimal interference. That's how it had always worked. The reptilian officer tilted his head, his scales shifting color slightly, in what might have been curiosity or amusement. "Do you know whose planet you took?" Grossar's forearms flexed with irritation. "Of course I know! Those furballs that no one in the Council respects. Those little creatures who think themselves warriors," he snorted, a sound like boulders rolling down a mountain. "Those failures of evolution who can barely reach a grown being's knee. They're a joke. Everyone laughs at them. They have no allies, no power, no influence." The officer's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. "No allies, no power, no influence." A pause. "Except the humans." Utter silence filled the interrogation room. Grossar felt his four hearts skip a beat in synchronized fear. His thick gray skin suddenly felt too thin. His mouth went dry. "The humans?" His voice came out smaller than he intended. "You're telling me the humans would actually kill us just because we went a bit rough on some furballs?" The reptilian officer picked up the datapad and swiped across its surface. The image of the prison world disappeared, replaced by something else. He turned the screen toward Grossar. The image showed a fleet. Not just any fleet, a human fleet. Dozens of warships, each one bristling with weaponry that made Grossar's pirate vessels look like children's toys. The lead ships were massive, their hulls dark and angular, designed not for show, but for action. The image was time-stamped, showing coordinates that made Grossar's blood run cold. "Earth's Fourth Fleet," the officer said calmly. "This image was taken 3 hours ago. They were approximately 6 hours from reaching the Sodif homeworld when we arrested you and your entire crew." Grossar stared at the image. His four eyes tracked across the screen, counting ships, noting weapon configurations, calculating firepower. The mathematics of his own death played out in his mind with terrible clarity.
We imprisoned you without a trial," the officer continued, his voice taking on an almost conversational tone. "And you will face a life sentence not because the galaxy suddenly developed affection for the Sativ. We did it for your own safety. You were about to meet your maker, Pirate King Grossar. We simply intervened to avoid more trouble."
The shock in Grossar's eyes was visible even in the dim light. All 4 of his pupils had contracted to pinpoints. His massive frame seemed to shrink, his shoulders slumping as the reality of how close he'd come to oblivion settled over him like a burial shroud. The reptilian officer set the datapad down again and walked toward the door. Then he paused, one clawed hand resting on the frame. He turned back, his head tilting in that curious reptilian way.
"I find something curious," he said, his voice thoughtful. "Those furballs, the Sativ, despite being utterly harmless, despite being all talk and no action, have a culture that revolves entirely around the notion of being fierce warriors, powerful, dangerous. That's basically all they talk about. It's their entire identity."
He made a sound that might have been a laugh.
"That's why they became the laughingstock of the galaxy. All that posturing from such tiny, adorable creatures."
Grossar said nothing. What was there to say?
"But here's what I find interesting," the officer continued. "Do you know what the human ambassadors talk about? In every council meeting, every diplomatic session, every negotiation?"
Grossar stared at him blankly, his forearms hanging limply in their restraints. The officer answered his own question.
"Peace, diplomacy, conflict resolution. That's all they ever discuss. Peace, understanding, finding common ground. They give species about harmony between species, about solving problems without violence, about the importance of protecting the weak and vulnerable."
He paused at the doorway, his silhouette framed by the harsh corridor light.
"Don't you find it strange," he asked, his voice soft and contemplative, "that those 2 species get along so well?"
The door hissed shut, leaving Grossar alone in the darkness, with that question echoing in the silence like a death knell.